Håfa Day students, I am Governor Lou Leon Guerrero. Welcome to PBS University. Our friends at PBS Guam and the Guam Department of Education put this episode together with some fun and exciting learning material to help you keep up with your studies. So thank you for joining us on another learning adventure. Sidzus Masi and have a great listen.
Håfa Day, and welcome to this series about archaeology and ancient sites of the Mariana Islands. These episodes introduce the most current facts and findings from archaeological sites toward clarifying what we know versus what we do not know about how people lived in the islands throughout the last thousands of years. This knowledge can support diverse new discussions, perspectives, and interpretations. I hope that you like this series, and I look forward to learning more together. In the Mariana Islands, the traditional Latte sites are known as ancestral places and as symbols of indigenous Chamorro heritage and history. Latte are the remains of traditional house sites. Originally, they were made with stone pillars known as haligi, topped by capital stones known as tasa, in turn supporting the wood and thatch components of a house. This particular combination of the pillars with capitals, all made of stone, has been unique to the Mariana Islands, not seen anywhere else in the world. People last had lived actively at Latte houses and villages during the late 1600s, during the time of intensive conflicts between Spanish imperial forces and the indigenous people of the Mariana Islands. By about the year 1700, the surviving people were relocated into a few Spanish-controlled villages, and they no longer occupied the traditional Latte villages. Today, Latte are remembered and respected as ancestral places, and people have developed many different perspectives about reconnecting with the history and heritage of these sites. Impressively vast and diverse knowledge can be accessed through the written and unwritten histories about specific localities of Latte sites and villages, as well as about the traditional society of the Latte period in a general sense. Archaeology has been productive for adding to the historical and traditional knowledge about Latte sites. While the wood and thatch components of the Latte houses have decayed and decomposed long ago, the stone portions of the haligi and the tasa have persisted through time, along with broken fragments of pottery, stone and shell tools, food middens, and other durable remnants from the past. According to the archaeological evidence, people had been living in the Mariana Islands ever since at least as early as 1500 BC, and then the Latte period can be defined in the upper layers with distinctive pottery and other artifacts, along with the remnants of the Latte structures dated throughout a period that began around AD 1000 and continued through about AD 1700. Nearly all of the known Latte sites are visible on the ground surface today, relating to the last time when people lived actively at these sites, mostly during the 1600s and associated with the time of Spanish conflicts. Older portions of the archaeological layers extended deeper beneath the surface. So far, the oldest bases of Latte constructions and the diagnostic pottery and other artifacts of the Latte period have been dated as early as about the year 1000. In the deeper and older layers prior to the year 1000, the older archaeological layers extended more than 2,000 years earlier, dated at least as early as 1500 BC. During those older periods, people built their houses on wooden posts without the stone pillars that later would define the Latte period. Throughout the course of numerous generations and several centuries since 1500 BC, the archaeological layers have shown how people developed different practical solutions and artistic preferences in the tools that they used, the foods that they ate, and the houses where they lived. In this long-term chronological view of archaeology, the Latte period represented a time when people already had inherited the history and knowledge from their prior generations of ancestors. The most notable change at this time was the use of stone instead of wood for making the traditional Latte structures. Latte have been reported in every island of the Marianas. The sites are best known in the larger southern islands of Guam, Rota, Tinian, and Saipan. In these islands, the natural geological limestone formations provided the raw materials that people had quarried for making the stone haligi and tasa of the Latte sites. In the farther northern islands of the Gani, the primary raw material sources were the formations of volcanic rocks, appearing in many different varieties depending on the localized geological characteristics. Today, Latte are recognized as parts of the archaeological signature of the last time when an indigenous Chamorro cultural system operated prior to the intensive impacts of Spanish imperialism of the late 1600s. While the Latte represent ancient houses, they can be appreciated as parts of a larger cultural system or landscape, attested in the archaeological signature spanning approximately from AD 1000 through 1700. In a broader geographic view of Pacific Oceania, the Latte of the Marianas were a local expression of a region-wide formalization of stonework villages and monuments. These formalizations emerged throughout the Pacific Oceanic region after about the year AD 1000. These stonework sites strengthened the links between people and their land, especially when households and entire villages were fixed in place with these stonework constructions, monumental creations, and burials at the houses in specifically designated places that endured through the next generations. Within the Pacific-wide pattern of stonework sites after AD 1000, the Latte of the Marianas were unique in their form. Outside the Mariana Islands, no other community had made their houses in this particular design of the pillars and capitals made of stone. These stone portions of Latte were arranged in paired rows, usually in pairs of 4 pillars, but rarely as few as 3 pairs or as many as 8 pairs. With whatever natural slope was evident in the terrain, people had aligned the long axis of the paired rows along with the natural contour. As a result, the long axis was parallel with the seashore or with a stream bank. The downslope side usually has been interpreted as the front or face of a house. Different activity areas or sub-areas can be defined first by tracing the housing footprint. At most Latte, the densest concentrations of artifacts and midden tend to be found around the edges of the housing footprint, typically on the downslope face or on either side of the house. Burial features most often were installed in the middle to the front side of a Latte. These ancient houses, of course, did not exist in isolation. Rather, they were parts of village settlements and landscapes. The numbers of Latte houses could be variable, and they can be associated with a surrounding larger context of food midden concentrations, workshops, fresh water sources, ritual or ceremonial places, and other features. Usually, Latte were constructed in clusters of at least 2 Latte sets in close proximity to one another, and often Latte sites included 8, 10, or even more Latte structures. Depending on how the individual Latte and the clusters of Latte were distributed across an area, the patterns could be interpreted as reflecting traditional households, communities, or villages. Usually in each Latte site, one individual Latte structure was notably larger than the others. In some cases, the larger Latte could represent a more prominent status. In other cases, perhaps the larger size was intended for accommodating more numbers of people, such as in a community gathering place. Overall, in the Mariana Islands, most of the haligi of Latte stood about 80 to 100 centimeters in height, roughly half the height of an average person. In the farther northern islands of the Gani, such as at Pagan, some of the haligi were made from the natural waterborne beach cobbles that barely reached to the knee-level height of a person. Others were slightly taller, made of the locally available tufaceous volcanic formations. In the cases of taller Latte, the haligi portions were about equal with the height of a person, and many, in fact, were much taller. The clearest example of a large size of Latte that probably signaled high status has been at the famous House of Taga in San Hallam of Tinian. The House of Taga was the largest Latte ever to be standing in the Mariana Islands. Just the pillar or the haligi portion was more than 3 meters in height. Originally, the house would have towered at more than twice the height of an average person. Meanwhile, several other smaller Latte had been constructed in the surrounding area of the traditional Latte village of San Hallam. Although the House of Taga was the largest Latte ever standing, one other case could have been even larger, yet it never was completed. In the island of Rota, the As Nieves quarry site has revealed the largest haligi and tasa that ever had been carved and prepared. The pieces were nearly finished, but they were not yet removed from the ground to be transported to their intended destination. Most likely, the work at the As quarry site was not yet finished at the time of the Spanish conflicts during the late 1600s. Possibly, though, the work had stopped for another reason or at a different point in time. Given the exceptional size of a few of the Latte in comparison to most of the others, those few examples of the larger Latte can be interpreted as serving a distinctive function apart from the others, such as for signaling high status, for accommodating more numbers of people, or perhaps for both of those possibilities simultaneously. Another important aspect of the As quarry site has been the ability to observe the traces of the tool marks that people had made when carving and shaping the stone material. At this site, as well as at many other quarry sites and workshop areas, the tool marks match with the expectations of the cutting, gouging, and chiseling by the traditional stone and shell tools of the Mariana Islands. Notably, people had been making these tools of the locally available stone sources and giant clamshells ever since the oldest archaeological layers dated back to 1500 BC, or perhaps even older. In other words, people already had been using the necessary tools and technology for the stone quarrying long prior to the Latte period. People must have recognized a compelling reason to invest their time and labor in the stone quarrying and in the transportation of the stones to their intended destinations. Otherwise, people could have continued with the pre-existing traditions of raising their houses on wood posts. Those traditions already had been effective for thousands of years. Regardless of the motivations for using stone instead of wood, the physical characteristics of the stone materials naturally were different from what people had known when working with wood materials. Hypothetically, the older wooden design of a post-raised house later was modified by applying the same overall design principles, but with using stone as the raw material. The more ancient wooden houses of the Mariana Islands prior to the Latte period have been documented only through the surviving remnants of the post mold and bracings, along with the surrounding features in the ground, without showing the actual wood elements that had decayed long ago. In this case, the shapes and designs of the wood components cannot be ascertained directly. They may have looked like wooden versions of Latte, but the surviving evidence has not allowed for proving or disproving this hypothesis. By comparison, people living in nearby regions of Taiwan and Southeast Asia continued to make similar houses on raised wooden posts, while they invested in other forms of stonework features and monuments around their wooden houses. As recently as the 1900s in Taiwan, wooden discs were fitted around the wood post, reportedly acting as guards to protect against rats raiding into the houses. Importantly, the discs did not rest atop the house posts. Instead, they were carved with holes to fit around the house posts, resting slightly below the raised floor of the house. These discs therefore did not act as direct physical supports for the overlying house structure. If the designs of the wooden discs were part of the architectural heritage behind Latte, then these designs were modified when converting the house posts into stone pillars. The use of stone as the raw material, however, could have presented an extra issue of needing to carve a hole through the stone for making a stone disc. In addition to the labor investment in this extra work, the disc form may have caused engineering problems in the physical distribution of the weight and the balance of the mass of the construction in total. I should stress that the shift from wood to stone construction still will need more research. Possibly, engineering experiments can be productive with computer simulations or replicas of the raw materials. For now, though, the different ideas could be possible as hypotheses that have not yet been proven or disproven. Concerning what actually happened at the Latte houses, the written histories and the unwritten traditions have indicated different information and perspectives that have not always corroborated one another. Differences have been suggested in higher versus lower status of the houses or households, family living houses versus community serving houses, and options of practical dwellings, workshops, storage houses, and more. In this situation, probably people had made and used their Latte houses in diverse ways. The technical function certainly was for a house raised above the ground, but each house individually may have been different in at least some aspects. Conceivably, people used their houses for multiple reasons throughout their lifetimes and across successive generations. When looking closely at the Latte of any site or village area, each instance has revealed at least some degree of difference in the technical design, the artistic expression, and the compositions of the associated artifacts and food remains. At one particular Latte house, people may have focused more on cooking shellfish inside large pottery bowls. At another Latte house, people may have focused more on using stone or shell adzes. When looking at the scale of a household or a community composed of multiple individual Latte, the total evidence in the archaeological record reflects how people at this larger scale contributed to accomplish all of the daily tasks and routines for supporting the household or the community. Within this larger context, the people at each Latte house individually may have contributed in slightly different ways depending on their skills, their personal preferences, and their identified roles in the larger society. Each Latte village area tends to show its own architectural style, and each individual Latte structure can convey a sense of its own personality or specific role within its village context. Now, with understanding the general parameters about Latte sites, I would like to share a narrative of the life cycle of a Latte site, beginning with how people selected the site location and continuing all the way through the eventual site abandonment. As a matter of practicality, Latte were constructed on level or roughly level ground, and they were not situated on steep slopes. Whoever lived at a Latte would need to find reliable access to fresh water and to other essential resources. Usually, a Latte would be positioned close to those supporting habitats. Whenever a site location was selected, then it would need to be large enough to accommodate at least one housing footprint. Additional houses could be built either on the same landform or within close enough proximity to function as part of the same household or community. In a few cases, Latte were constructed in places of pre-existing villages, overlaying deeper and older archaeological deposits. In many cases, though, the sites of Latte were selected for the first time of constructing former villages in those locations, and no older archaeological layers are evident beneath those Latte occupations. Depending on how individual people related with the pre-established communities or lineages, they may have been able to build their houses in certain locations, but not necessarily in others. The archaeological record does not show these details or the kinship relations of individual people. Instead, we can attempt to make some general inferences, such as about the role of matrilineal traditions in shaping the links between family lineages and units of land through time. After selecting the house building site, then the various raw materials could be brought to this location. For Latte houses in particular, these stone elements were acquired from suitable geological sources, and then they needed to be transported over some distance. In the cases of quarrying from natural limestone formations, the final breakage and lifting of the stones may have involved a number of techniques. Fire may have softened and loosened some of the material. Wood, soaked in water, could expand and result in force directed against the limestone material. Levers and possible counterweights probably were instrumental for the work at hand. In order to obtain enough limestone for a typical Latte construction of 4 pillars of 1 meter height each, plus their associated capital stones and sufficient practical working space, most quarry sites would cover about 16 square meters of a limestone exposure. We do not know the mode of transporting the heavy stones to their final destinations at Latte sites. Wheeled transportation and draft animals were not available in the Mariana Islands prior to the Spanish imperial period. Transport over water certainly would have limited the overland portion of the effort. At some point, though, these stones must have been carried overland, possibly with the aid of vines or ropes, levers, and counterweights. The transportation of stones may have overlapped with the task of bringing the individual pieces to their precise locations. Again, without wheeled technology, people needed to rely on the mechanics of leverage and counterweighting. In order to stabilize the pillars and capitals in their intended positions, the ground was prepared in advance. Many Latte were set into prepared foundations or pavements of pebbles, cobbles, and small boulders. Some have shown formal bracing stones around the bases of the pillars. A few of the pillars were made with notched bottoms that could resist sideways motion. Often, the capital stones, or tassa, were made with slight sockets that could interface with the tapered tops of the pillars. These specific forms varied from one Latte to another, thus revealing different approaches to the technological challenge of how to stabilize the Latte elements. To some extent, the engineering problems were solved by spreading the weight or load across the full set of pillars and capital stones. First, though, the layout of stones must have been measured carefully in order to achieve rectilinear alignment and even spacing. Otherwise, inconsistencies could create a weakness in the overall structure. The spacing could be different for the long axis versus the short axis, but the spacing internally within each axis needed to be even. Additionally, the tops of the stone elements needed to be level, regardless of any slight slope of the underlying ground. Perhaps the structural stability was enhanced by the design of the wood and thatch components that no longer are detectable today. Ultimately, we need to remember that of course not every latte was made in exactly the same way. People probably shared some basic concepts of what latte should look like, yet they expressed their individuality within the generally accepted guidelines. Aspects of daily life varied among the numbers of latte in each village. We can notice differences in the constructions of latte as well as in the compositions of artifacts and food midden. In addition to the pottery, plenty of other artifacts characterize the latte period, although they occur in fewer numbers than the pottery fragments. Examples include slingstones, various forms of adzes and chisels, different kinds of fishing gear, pounders and pestles, abraders, containers for holding slaked lime powder, shell ornaments, and much more. Where food middens have been preserved, they usually are dominated by shellfish remains, such as the shells of small strombus gastropods known as dogas. Animal bones mostly refer to fish, but small amounts of birds and fruit bats are represented in some sites. Many latte have revealed arrangements of stones as pavings, alignments, or other constructions that marked or delineated different activity areas. Among these examples are lines of cobbles and small boulders, usually found along the front face of latte. Grinding basins, or lusong, often were incorporated into the stonework designs. They could be made in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. The household varieties of lusong can be distinguished apart from the large and immovable permanent grinding basins that are found in special places outside and separate from the latte villages, for instance at the entrances to ritual caves. Many latte sites are known as places of burial features. The tradition of burial at the house appears to have started in the Mariana Islands with the latte period, around the year AD 1000. During older time periods, the archaeological layers have shown the remains of houses without burials, and instead the older burials have been found only in special places outside the housing areas. This same pattern was evident throughout the broader Pacific region, wherein people started the tradition of burial at the house only after about the year AD 1000, in the context of building various forms of stonework sites and monuments. During the latte period, burial at a latte house may have been the expected or ideal tradition, but still some individuals were buried at other locations, such as at ritual caves. Eventually, people stopped living at the latte houses and villages as part of the major impact of Spanish conflicts during the late 1600s. Some latte sites show signs of deliberate burning and dismantling, today evoking thoughts of the violent encounters as remembered in the historical traditions. By the year 1700, the latte villages and their associated contexts abruptly ended as living cultural systems, and instead they gained new meaning as ancestral places to be remembered and respected. Looking at the full life cycle of latte, we can appreciate how they were used as houses in a technical sense, but they lived through various associations and contexts at different times. We can think of latte as architectural engineering accomplishments, as places of ancient living, as places of burial and ritual, and as sites of ancestral heritage. Probably all of those functions and contexts were known to the people who once lived at these sites, although the precise details undoubtedly changed over the course of decades or centuries. This review of latte just barely has touched on the many different topics that could be addressed. What aspects are interesting for you? What parts would you like to explore more? Thank you for joining us in learning about archaeology and ancient sites of the Mariana Islands. If you would like to access more details, then I encourage you to visit in person or online at the Micronesian Area Research Center of the University of Guam, or at the many other libraries, museums, and offices that work with historic preservation, archaeology, and ancient history. Thank you again for watching this program. I hope that you will continue to explore and discover more.
I'm Josh Tenorio, your Lieutenant Governor. Thank you for being with us today and for taking the time to continue your learning with PBS University. I also want to thank your teachers and support staff at DOE and PBS Guam for their work and their commitment to you, our students. Si Dus Ma'asi, and we hope that you enjoy this PBS University instruction.